I'm Matt Wilhelmi. I'm the owner of Strategic Voyages Business Consultants, and I'm also the author of Taboo Business Questions, What is Haunting Every Entrepreneur's Growth? And I'm joined by my good friend, Jim Voigt, small business attorney, helping businesses launch, grow, and exit. Hey, Jim.
How you doing, Matt?
This is our third episode on succession planning, and Jim and I have talked a lot about some of these issues that companies face when they're doing succession planning. We've talked a lot about some of the key questions that need to be asked on the front end, and now it is time for some success stories, and we're going to give some advice to this hypothetical company that we've been talking about. Mom and dad run the company. They have a son that they're trying to kind of get brought up in the company and eventually one day to sell to him. And so here we are in the final episode. So thanks, Jim, again, for taking some time.
Sure. No, I really appreciate you having me back on. And I, as we were going through just our notes on, what are we going to talk about? What are some good examples? I had some thoughts and looking back on those, they were so enjoyable for me about success stories because from a legal perspective, they were hyper technical and really tested me in terms of the documents that needed to be put together. And, I have that tendency to think, well, everyone's going to love this story, and probably not because it's so technical. But Matt, you talked to me about a company that this to me is so compelling that you worked with a company where the buyer picked it up at a a pretty low price, really didn't operate the company differently at all, and then absolutely knocked it out of the park years later when he sold it. What happened there?
Yeah, so in that particular story, I met this business owner, and he was basically very, very humble. He did not come across as somebody who's very flashy, but he basically just said, I've got a nice sized business and we do a really good job. We know what we're doing. They're a professional services firm. And what he told me is that he had purchased this company from the previous owner about 6 years prior. And me working with him now over these last year, 12 months to 2 years, has really become quite obvious the difference. He is somebody who has set up his business from the moment that he bought it from the previous owner with the intention to sell. And so although the operations are still the same, it's literally the same team, it's the same clients, a lot of it's the same. The biggest difference that this business owner has is that he's had the mindset to think about what is it that I need to get in place and to do in order to maximize my return. And the real key there is because he's in the professional services industry, it's finding the right niche. So this business owner has been very actively networking, has been very actively getting involved in trade associations. They've added some new certifications to their team that have made them even more of a niche. And so they've increased their value so much to the right buyer. Not just anybody's going to come along and buy this company. It really needs to be the right fit. And so this particular business owner did a lot of work. He wasn't getting paid for it. It's not like it's billable time. As the owner of the company, Jim, you're very worried about billable time, but you can't bill for going to a networking meeting, but you can see the value, or if you do see the value, you can realize that when you go to sell it.
Well, I'll tell you, as you're talking, I'm picking out a couple of things on what he probably did right, or maybe what the previous owner probably didn't do right. One of the things is knowing what you're worth. If you have a company that's essentially doing the same amount of business with the same team, and they've made some tweaks, you talked about some good improvements they made, but they didn't do radical improvements. I believe when we talked before, you're talking about a 10x difference. He sold it for about 10 times what he paid for it.
Yeah.
So he
made over $1 million. He made a lot of money.
Yeah. So that previous owner didn't know what his company was worth. It's as simple as that. We talked about in the previous episode, knowing your numbers, but also, what exactly is your company worth? Make sure you're getting what it's worth. So the previous owner clearly sold too low, but this person recognized what he was worth. The other thing that you really talked about was taking a lot of steps. It sounds like based on the profession, based on the industry that this person is in, he doesn't necessarily have the ability to open it up to a wide array of potential buyers. So for example, if you're selling a plumbing company, you might sell it to another plumber, but you also might just sell it to like a savvy investor that, knows how to run a company, regardless of what kind of company it is. But it sounds like your company, your client here, this company is going to have a small array of people or companies that they can sell to. So what he did was he made it easy to buy. He had all the certifications that he needed. He had nice routines and processes in place so that when you are selling to somebody, they don't have to come in and figure out, all right, how am I going to fix everything that's wrong with this company, right? If you're selling to a turnaround specialist, you're always going to be discounting your price because there's so many things they have to fix. It sounds like what his strategy was, I don't want to have to sell this thing because it's failing and I need to get out. I want to get this steam train rolling down the tracks, have somebody see that it's moving efficiently and fast and has a lot of momentum behind it, and they want to pick up that momentum. So, you're selling an ongoing profit stream that isn't necessarily even easy to duplicate. It's just already happening, and it's just going to keep happening when the buyer takes over. So yeah, that's a fantastic example of somebody that, and it's interesting because it falls so much in your arena as opposed to mine. They're still going to need a lawyer to paper up that deal, right? We're going to need an asset purchase agreement or a stock purchase agreement and all of those things. But really, the difference between those two is going to be what was going on operationally during those 6 years after he purchased the company and until he sold it. So it's an absolute testament to the fact that don't wake up and sell next month. Just don't do that. Start with the end in mind.
Yeah, he certainly did. And, that's a really great testament to his kind of foresight in the business, but also just his ability to really get after it every day. I would imagine there were probably days when he didn't want to and, thought it was maybe a waste of time, or his wife was telling him it was stupid. But, now he's reaping the benefits of it in a big, big way. So, thinking about this case study that you and I have been kicking around and this husband and wife and their son, are we ready yet to kind of give some advice and talk about maybe what steps they should take?
Yeah. And I think your example here is the perfect lead in for this. The number one thing that I think people need to do is to decide what their selling strategy is going to be 3 to 5 years out and commit to it. Now, why doesn't that happen? The reason is because everybody wants to keep their options open. And, I work with a lot of solo attorneys and solo CPAs and professionals on how to build their business. And I always tell them, don't try to be all things to all people. Have a narrow focus on your practice. And that scares them because, as a lawyer, what if somebody comes to me and they need help defending a DUI? I will land them in jail. That is my level of experience in helping people with a DUI. I don't know how to do that. My focus is so narrow that I say no to so much business. But the amount of people that need what I do is more than enough to provide for a good living. It's the same when you're selling your business. Commit to a strategy. Your example of this client who bought low and sold high, he had a strategy up front and he committed to it. He's not a robot. I'm sure he made adjustments over the course of time, but he had a strategy and he committed to it. When you try to keep all possible avenues on the table, that's when you get into I'm not telling my employees until the morning after the closing. And, by trying to keep all of your options open, you end up not being able to execute on any of them. So the number one piece of advice we give to our hypothetical company, that's our example, is make a decision on what your best strategy is and commit to it. Yes, you'll have to adjust along the way, but commit to the overall concept of that strategy very early on.
That's great. I know that when we were kind of talking in the break there, Jim, you had mentioned an insurance company that kind of had a similar success story, maybe not quite as cut and dry, but did it the right way.
Yeah, it's hard for me to talk about this because what I would love to do is spend about 3 hours describing the technicalities of what they did. But essentially the bottom line is they decided early on that they were going to identify their 8 key insurance executives in this company, and they were going to start to slowly transition stock over to them. The way they do that is fascinating for me and almost nobody else. But what they did was they effectively transitioned stock to these 8 key employees over the course of 6 years. It was so smooth and it was so well done. And at the same time, they worked with somebody like you to not just get that done legally. There's documents you need to do that, right? That's what I do. But they also were preparing these people to run this company so that by the time they were at the end of that 6-year process, the owner was hardly around. He was unnecessary. And there's a level of humility that you need for a slow transition like that. As the owner, you are most beneficial in putting yourself into a position where no one hardly notices when you're gone, right? That was a little hard for him. We had a couple of lunches where he was struggling with that a little bit, but it was the right thing to do. The the success story at the end of it all is they did this transition. They moved these people into ownership positions. The company was running so well that they attracted an institutional buyer, and just an investor group that wanted to buy them. So these 9 people, the 8 key executives plus the original owner, sold their stock at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday to an institutional buyer that wanted no interest in running the company. They all went back to work the next day, each of them with a few $1 million in their pocket, a 20% raise, sitting at the same desk with the same pad and pen that they had the day before. It was an incredible deal. And without getting into the technicalities of it, it was because they absolutely committed to that process at the very beginning. They knew exactly how they wanted to do it. So they identified the steps that they needed to attack during those 6 years. They executed on all of them perfectly, and it worked out very well.
Yeah, what a great story. I mean, I think about an ideal situation, and it's tough to think about anything more ideal than that. You get to keep your purpose, you get a bunch more money, you're making more, nobody loses their job.
Right.
You just go, we're gonna go back to work $1 million richer.
Yeah, imagine explaining that to your spouse. Honey, here's the deal. I now have $3 million and I'm still going back to work tomorrow, but I'm making more money. It's a huge win. And, honestly, it was a huge win for the buyer too. This company was kicking off a lot of profit, so it was 100% a huge win all the way around.
That's great. So, I'm hearing this theme of having the strategy, right?
Yes.
I don't think it's any coincidence that it happens to be the name of my company, Strategic Voyages. But when you do have a strategy and you stick to it, things tend to work out a lot better. And so deciding your selling strategy, I wrote that down in my notes, is the advice here. You and I had talked about maybe a third story we're going to talk about. And this one had a really long kind of process of some knowledge transfer. There were some key relationships, some key processes that needed to be transferred. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it was a professional services firm that I worked with. So it is a little different, right? And what they did was they set up a really good structure. It was similar to the insurance, where they were selling small pieces of the ownership of this company to sort of the next generation and then the next generation after that, so that the actual legal ownership of this company was constantly a slowly rotating door, right? The people at the top, in terms of the percentage ownership, their percentage kept shrinking, and then the people at the bottom, their percentage kept growing. And then there was a third generation behind them where that transition started. So it was this constantly slowly rotating ownership, which was brilliant, the way that they executed it. However, that's where most people stop, especially law firms. My gosh, right? Because all we care about is the documents. What they also did better than anyone I've ever seen was they created a system by which they were preparing this next generation to actually run the firm. It is so common that you'll have this generation come up, and then some guy who's 93 finally stops coming into the office and he transitioned his ownership, but none of the people below him are actually running to run a team. That's 100% not the case for those folks there. And so, yeah, in addition, the key takeaway there is I love the idea of a slow transition. It's not right for every business, but for professional services, it's really a good solution. But don't just treat it as a legal documentation process. You also need to be working with somebody like you at Strategic Voyages, where you are preparing that next generation to be leaders. It's not intuitive for everybody.
Yeah, I think about, running a company being a lot different than doing the work in the company.
Yes.
And so, a lot of people talk about working on their business instead of in their business. And when you're getting ready to sell, even if you're years and years down the road, your time of working on the business needs to increase quite a bit compared to your time working in the business. Right. And so if you are a business owner that can't break away from the day-to-day, can't get out of the minutia of client details, or you have to be the one that quotes jobs, or maybe you're the one that has to do the jobs, that's probably a situation that's going to take some time to unwind through a knowledge transfer, through kind of handing the keys over, not tossing the keys, but one by one, perhaps transferring these knowledge keys to the next generation, because you want to have a company that runs really, really smooth without you having to be there every day. That's the company that's going to get a lot more value. If you're the only one that can answer the phone, and you're the only one that knows about, these different situations with clients, and you're the only one that runs team meetings, what's going to happen when you're gone? The business is going to fail. That's not how to sell a company.
Exactly right. Yeah. And the tough thing, I think, for entrepreneurs too, because the average person who ramps a business up to a point where it has that level of success is the type of person that just figures out stuff for themselves. And they have a hard time necessarily relating with people that want to be trained. So it's not always intuitive for them. Like, well, why? I mean, I didn't know he trained me. Why should I train them? You should. You just should.
Yeah. So the advice for this mom and dad kind of bringing their son up in the company, and I think a lot of business owners can relate to this, right? There's a lot of entrepreneurs when they're running their company, they see their kids and their kids see the lifestyle. Maybe there's some flexibility of time, and they want to know, how do I get my children involved in the business? Maybe they're grown adults, but then how do I transfer that business? I'm hoping that they find this podcast, this video interview, as a resource to be able to figure out some of those things. They need to decide their selling strategy. They need to figure out how to become a little bit more of an absent owner, maybe removed from the company, but still able to make some really great strides in the company and transfer that knowledge. So Jim, thank you so much for your time. This has been a really, really great adventure going down the road of succession planning. I really appreciate your time. Again, I'm with Jim Voigt, small business attorney, helping businesses launch, grow, and exit. Jim, any final thoughts?
No, I just, I guess there is one final thought. What we're talking about is developing and locking into a strategy early. Please get some advice. I would love it if people talk to you, because I know we work together with clients and I know how successful you help your clients become. Whether it's you, whether it's somebody else, don't lock into a strategy that's bad. So, set up a strategy that's well suited to the type of business that you have and the type of person that you are, and getting some advice from somebody who has experience helping companies do that is absolutely worth the investment.
That's great. Jim, again, thank you so much for your time, and I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Take care, Matt. Thanks.